And I think one word that I would use to describe it is how understated it is, right? And as I said earlier, there is actually an elite group of collectors here in Taiwan, right? That is actually world class, right? And on top of that, there's also a very vibrant artistic scene here in Taiwan as well, right? And my hope for a fair such as Taipei Dangdai is really bring that to light and really showcase that particular community to Taiwan and also to the rest of the world.
And speaking of which, there are a number of big art fairs, and UBS is involved in some of them. I mean, Art Basel in Hong Kong, there are art fairs in Shanghai also, where you're going to see a huge international kind of cross-section of buyers and artists. Why do you think it was important to have something in Taiwan, in Taipei?
I think it comes back to the identity of Taiwan in itself, right? Oftentimes, while we talk about Taiwan as a quote-unquote a small market, right, both in financial terms as well as in the art world, right? But the fact is, being small doesn't mean that it's not important. Being small sometimes means that it has a certain set of uniqueness that we need to reveal and really look at it from different angles to be able to appreciate it. And from my perspective, that's exactly what we're trying to do here with this particular fair.
Taiwan has had a history of art collectors, perhaps very different from other major cities. Can you explain what the art collection scene is like here and how that's changed, especially in modern day?
So I would characterize there are a couple of different groups, right? I think for the longest time, Taiwan has been known to have a very sort of significant art collections on some of these sort of old master of Chinese arts. Right? So that I would term that as the sort of first generation, right? And then you start moving into some of these collectors who are very important in contemporary Chinese art, right? And then that moves into contemporary art in general, covering the rest of the globe, right? And now all of a sudden, what we're seeing now is there's actually a sort of a fourth generation, if you will, or a fourth iteration of collector. These are the young collectors, right? These are potentially the second gens. These are potentially the self-made millionaires and tech tycoons, right? Where they see art, it's now no longer constrained by labeling or categories. They are much more into the holistic collection of art, how these art actually speak to them, how these art makes a statement to the world, right? So there's actually a very sort of gradual migration or evolution, if you will, and seeing that, being able to kind of sit on the outside and seeing that sort of evolution is actually truly exciting for us.
So how does it sit when it comes to in terms of investing in art? Like, is art still an investment in that sense? If we're kind of going into a different, I guess, way of buying art and how art speaks to the buyers.
Yeah, I think to me, right, and actually to UBS, we don't think about art as a financial investment, right? We think about art as a pursuit of perfection and pursuit of excellence, and most importantly, it's pursuit of passion, right? And the sort of dividend of that investment, it comes in the form of joy. It comes in the form of self-discovery. It comes in the form of thinking about what the art is telling you, how the artist is critiquing the contemporary world and contemporary society that we live in, right? And that is very different from the sort of traditional financial asset that UBS typically talks about.
You have an engineering background and you come from the world of finance. I love how you're talking like an artist. That is actually fascinating to hear you talk about, the UBS point of view of art and your feelings on art. Going back to a few things that you said in your previous answer, you talked about millionaires and kind of the next generation of wealth in Hong Kong. In fact, a recent UBS Global Wealth report stated that Taiwan is set to see the fastest rise in millionaires worldwide. How do you think that's going to change the art scene here, or has that already changed what we've seen?
I think we're already seeing that, right? The fact is, this particular growth certainly in my view, is going to make for a much more vibrant art community here in Taiwan, right? Again, I think from my perspective, I see contemporary art as a critique by the artist of the society that we live in, right? And it is about our stewardship of that particular critique for the future generations to come. And I think these nouveau riche, as you talk about them, right? They are also seeing the importance of that and how it evolves into the future. And so they're very happy to kind of step in and take on that stewardship role, right? And so with that increase in wealth, I certainly hope that's going to be the case, right? Really be the guardian of these heritage for the society going forward into the future. And hopefully a lot of these collectors or collectors to be, right, once they are inspired by arts, right, they're going to be willing to take on those roles and preserve that legacy for the future generations.
You know, Taiwan's always known as Tech Island, given its strength in the technology sector. Has that somehow influenced art or artists here, or perhaps the art buyers here?
Yeah, I think in some ways, right, when you have different values sort of clash with one another, right, typically that's the sort of fertile ground for new ideas, new thoughts. And here in Taiwan, oftentimes we see technology versus the sort of traditional value as those clashing points, right? And therefore, it makes a very fertile ground for new ideas to develop right here in Taiwan. And so from my perspective and my observations, right, many of these tech tycoons as we have them here in Taiwan, right, they are actually avid art collectors because they get so much more out of it. It allows them to kind of step away from their day-to-day, from technology, from the trends of the world, and really looking, you know, for inner peace, right, or inner connections. And so to me, that's actually quite interesting to see, and really being able to talk to them and understanding where they're coming from. Oftentimes you get amazed.
And speaking of trends, if I ask you to look into your crystal ball, where do you see the art market heading over the next 5 years, and what kind of trends are you expecting from Taiwan?
Yeah, so I think our market, just like any other market, right, it goes through these cycles, right? And then on an ongoing basis, if we were to look in the past 18 months, right, our market certainly has softened, right? If you look at the sort of our market in totality globally, right, I think transaction value is probably down about 18% or so. However, you know, given that, you know, it's normal condition for any sort of market to kind of go through that cyclic cycle. And so for us, it's about observing that from a financial institution perspective, right? But at the same time, also encourage the right clients or right collectors to say, hey, this might be the right time, you know, to pursue your passion, right? Or to really make your statement, or really to build that legacy for your children, for the future, right? And to me, overall, cycles are normal, right? But it's how you go through the cycle, the mindset of really having that sort of, not looking at it as financial investment, looking at art as financial investment, but rather thinking about the longer term legacy, right? Be the guardian of these legacy. That invest through cycle mindset is really what's really going to drive the art world going forward.
UBS has partnered with Taipei Dangdai since it started about 6 years ago. Can you tell us what's different this year from the previous years?
Well, I think every year the excitement's always built, right? You know, I was sharing with you earlier that, you know, coming from a technology background, now I'm in finance, right? And for the longest time, I never thought I was quote unquote gifted in art, right? And so therefore, a lot of my friends, right, they are like me. They are not quite keen to the discourse in the art world, right? But having been through these historical Taipei Dangdai since 2019, all of a sudden I feel myself and my social circle around me are beginning to get more and more excited. They're looking forward to art fairs such as Taipei Dangdai and what it is able to bring some of the best art pieces in the world to Taiwan for for the masses, if you will, and get them more excited about, this is what art really means for the world and what it means for me, right? And so every year the excitement builds.
How would you say your perspective on art has changed since you've been part of Taipei Dangdai? And is there anything in particular that jumps out at you, a piece of art or some kind of art that you feel like kind of solidifies your passion for art?
Yeah, I think certainly, right? I mean, as I said earlier, I never thought myself as an art person, many years ago, right? But now every single year I come to Taipei Dangdai, I'm excited. I'm like a child in candy stores, right? Look at that, getting very excited. And I'll share with you, right? One of a very, very sort of famous Taiwanese artist, Wu Jitong, right? They actually have a piece right now, in a couple of pieces in the fair in itself, right? From afar, it looks like it's ancient Chinese calligraphy drawn paintings, but in fact the medium is very different. But it achieves a similar type of feeling, right? And so it's always very, very exciting for me to see these sort of little things that you never realize or you never noticed before, right? So I'm always very excited to kind of get the show started and then being able to get myself and my friends and family immersed in this particular world.